Hi everybody, has anybody put any of the, I think this is actually only week 3 for the exam prep, so I'm not really report. Anyway, has anybody started putting any of these tips into practice with your study? From either the assignment writing or the exam prep that you've been doing? Making a difference? Time will tell, I guess. So I'm glad. That's the whole reason I do this, to try and make everyone else's life easier. I've already suffered through pain of doing it the hard way, so hopefully you guys don't have to. So, where do we begin? Ditch the phone, ditch the laptop, ditch the snipping tool, ditch the taking photos of stuff. Write it down. The greatest tool. I know when I'm looking at my screen, I always lose my place because I get distracted by something on the screen. So, ditch the pen and paper. I mean, ditch the laptop, go with pen and paper. So, drink enough water and eat quickly. You don't drink enough water, the impulses, the electrical impulses going around your body don't travel around the body correctly. So, if I study for 10 hours straight before the exam, or I study for 2 hours, 2 hours once a day for 5 weeks. Sorry. If I study 2 hours a week for 5 weeks, what do you think is going to have the better outcome? It's definitely not for 10 hours in a row before the exam. And if we remember back to the note taking, this is really important. And this is why this is so good. Your revision that you're doing is only as good as the notes that you took. If you sat there and just listened and didn't take any notes, then you don't really have much to revise. You're just going to go and read absolutely everything there is to know about the topic. And how does that usually work out? I have a person with a senior biology exam on Friday. It came to me last night and wanted to do between 6 and 12 hours of sessions between this morning and Friday afternoon. Trying to learn the entire curriculum. Now, if she had done 1 hour a week, do you think she would be significantly better off? She'll still take a lot and go in better prepared than she was before. But it's certainly not the most efficient way. Great for me, because I get to teach her from start to finish in my way. But 1 hour a week for 3 months would have been better than 12 hours in 3 days. So how do you guys do it? What's your technique? Do you leave it to the last minute and try and cram absolutely everything you can to the hours before the exam? So Izzy's like me, she leaves it to the last minute. Then you sit there for 10, 12 hours at a time, getting stressed and anxious. You're not eating properly. So remember, we're taking a holistic approach. So if you're not eating, you're not sleeping, you're not drinking water, and you're trying to cram your studies, how do you think that's going to go? Think it's going to go well? Okay. So, anyone else want to share their study method? So Ewan does 2 hours a week. Sorry, Anna does 2 hours a week. So Issy gives herself a week. So what we're going to do, as we've done previously, is clear we're going to take what you have and what you do, and we're going to compare it to what we should do. And no one's ever going to expect you to become perfect. Nobody, and I say these things with a very general brush, very broad brush. Not everything works the same for every single person. Some people can cram and not eat and not do anything properly and still get really good grades. Other people have to do everything in a really methodical, stepwise process. What is the main thing that will what's the word? Determine whether or not your study is successful? Yep, so Ellie says how much we retain. It depends on how much effort you put in. So the biggest determining factor, with like most things in life, is how much effort you put into your study. If you do it properly, if you do it consistently, if you do it when you want to learn, how many times have you just sat there and studied because you didn't want to do it, but you thought you had to? How much of that did you retain? If you're only studying or doing something because you feel like you have to, you're wasting your time. You might as well go to bed, might as well go for a walk, get some fresh air, listen to a motivational podcast or something to get your mind back in the game. You spend 10 hours studying before your exam. For the first 2 or 3, you might be okay. And for the rest, you are really just wasting your time. You study because you feel like you have to. You might as well not bother. You'll ultimately actually retain less information for your exam if you keep trying to cram information in. If I've got a half full cup, can I fill my completely empty cup? Or am I just going to only get another half full cup? So the whole idea behind this is it's not just about how you study, it's how everything that you do affects you and affects your ability to study and retain information. If you're studying because you feel like you have to, but you're tired, you're run down, you don't want to be there, then the outcome is not going to be worth the hassle. You might as well do something else and then come back to the study. You find yourself getting frustrated, just walk away, put the pen down. That's my advice. Depends on the effort and your mindset. So this is the classic school model: is review, test, revise, test, fill gaps, test again. Do you find that this works for you? Helps you retain information? So for some people, it works really well. Some people will they'll learn a bit about the content, then you test that. Then by testing and then something revising what they got wrong, testing again, it sinks in. It's one kind of learning. Like me, if there's no context to what I'm learning, then there's no point in me doing. I will not retain any of it. So anyone that's had tutoring with me, if we're talking about human body systems, if we're talking about genetics, we'll always relate it to something you can see, feel, or something that you've been involved with. Because as soon as you link that, you create a link in your brain between the information you're learning and something else that's already in your brain, the more likely you are to retain that information. So we talk about hormones and genetics and proteins. And then we draw the flowchart for diabetes and what happens when diabetes happens in the body and where each of these parts fit into that process. And all of a sudden you're creating these linkages. If you're studying something you're interested in, that you've already done before, that you enjoy doing, do you retain the information better? Yeah. That is because you're creating links within your brain. You can link it to information that's already in your brain, or link it to something else that you're interested in, then memory will always be retained better. They say we only remember the things that we want to. It's another way to put that. So that's another way of looking at it. The standard school model is teach something in isolation. They're getting a lot better now. This year 11 student, they've just changed the QCE curriculum in Queensland. And that student now, they do cells, body systems, homeostasis, and disease as the 4 units for grade 11. So you learn about the cells, you learn about the body, you learn about the systems, then you learn about the diseases, which is what happens when the systems don't work properly. So the idea is that instead of just teaching things in isolation, they teach them in a logical chain of events. Learn something in a logical flow, you will retain it better. Whereas previously, in Queensland anyway, it was very much teach things in isolation, test them, revise what you didn't understand, test again, and hope that the information stayed in. Then you just moved on to the next topic without any linking between the two. Anyone that studied chemistry in high school will find this frustrating because they jump from topic to topic without any linking between the two. At least with maths, you get to link things together. You need to understand this, to understand this, to understand this, to understand this. Anyway, I won't jump ahead. This is the way that I do things, and the way that a lot of other people I spoke to like to teach. So we went through almost all of year 11 biology in 3 hours. So by giving the student a top-down view. So over the top, all you can see is the outline. What's the best way to start doing that? Anyone that's had tutoring sessions with me knows how I do it. So you draw out a process. So again, this is heavily towards the sciences, but it's in business, in maths, in science, in any of your other subjects. When you try to learn about a process, what's the best way that you guys find to learn a new process of doing something? So a scientific process, a process for writing an essay, a process for writing, how would you draw it out to understand it? Or would you just stare at it until it made sense. So anyone that's had, share with me, which is most of you, flowchart. So what am I doing here? What am I creating in the brain between this and this? Am I creating a linkage between two things? So whenever I teach someone something, say it be about asthma, the first thing I ask is, does anyone know anyone with asthma? Does anyone know anyone with diabetes? Anyone have diabetes? Because immediately you're more engaged and you're creating links to something you already know. So I say the reason a diabetic gets cold or whatever when they get low blood sugar is because of this. And you go, hang on, actually, yeah, that makes sense. I've seen someone with diabetes and they were really cold when they had low blood sugar. And immediately it's creating a picture in your mind as well. So you begin to, if you visualize something, again, you're more likely to retain that information. Yeah, the flowcharts are gold. I always use flowcharts. They don't work for every student though. But what I can do is add just one word to each of those boxes. So I get a basic outline, and I learn the basic outline, just each step in a process. I don't want to know anything else about it until I know every step in that process. Next thing I would do is then I add complexity. I add more to it. And then I learn that level. Then I let that sink in, and then I keep adding complexity until it's finished. So I add more steps or more complexity to each step. So each time you're adding complexity. So you're reinforcing the process. Who gets into an exam and you're trying to remember absolutely everything about a process or something that's happening, when really you should just start with an overall view. So you're warming your brain up. Because your brain knows how to build this from the simplest way. And then if I get a really complicated short answer question, you've got no idea how to answer it. But then you start doing other questions. Then you come back to it and you go, hang on, there we go. I know how to start this. And as you keep going, you keep adding more and more and more. And if you can train your brain to do things like that, and each time you add a layer of complexity, that previous layer, then that link in your brain, you can add another layer, so on and so forth. It doesn't work for everyone. Some people are not visual learners at all. Sorry. So inconsiderate person harassing me. Sorry. So Izzy learns better when she's told information. So it doesn't always work for everyone. So, okay. I'm going to, if you guys have a pen and paper there. So we're going to do a test. I'm just going to explain the information. Take notes as best you can as I just speak the information. So this is, again, I'm using this because I taught this today. Right, I'm just going to speak it at you. And then the next one I'll do a flowchart. So the body regulates the temperature, its core temperature, by using receptors in the skin that recognize a change in body temperature. The hypothalamus then sends a message to the receptors in the blood vessels, which constrict. We begin to sweat. The receptors in the skin and in the body then switch off because our core body temperature has come back down. Does that make any sense? Could you fluently recount that? Okay, so now we're going to try. I'm going to draw a flowchart. So this one is more complicated. What I want you to do now is think of someone that you know that has diabetes. Think of what you've seen on TV, what you've heard, and you're going to create links for her. Obviously, this isn't a lecture about science, but it's a process within the body that is best learned with these flowcharts. So type 1, Ali. So the person eats sugar. Get blood glucose level goes up. The hypothalamus reacts. The pancreas releases insulin. Pancreas releases insulin. Cells uptake glucose. We then have blood glucose level drops. So if you try to learn about diseases or something in the body, this is the normal process. This is the normal process that happens. Think of each of these as a stop on a train line. So we eat sugar, our blood glucose goes up, our brain reacts, our pancreas releases insulin, the cells take up glucose, and our blood glucose level goes down. Now the great thing about this, this is the normal process, but I want to know the disease process. But you can't understand the disease process until you understand the normal process. So if you're trying to learn something that doesn't work, the first thing you need to do is learn how it does work. Okay, so I say that the pancreas stops releasing insulin. So where does this go wrong? So this is the point where it stops. So in diabetes, this part doesn't happen. So diabetic has to inject insulin in order. So diabetic takes this path by injecting insulin. So it bypasses the body completely. Now this is a very, very basic overview. But how much easier is that to learn than trying to learn absolutely everything in one go and trying to work backwards? Why not start at the very bottom, the very basic, and then you can add complexity. You could say, eat sugar, which is broken down into glucose. That's the next step. A little bit more complex. Hypothalamus reacts, sends a neurotransmitter. Okay, so the pancreas is the beta islet cells. So see what I'm doing? I'm learning one new piece of information. Once I have the basics done, I learn one new piece of information and where it fits in the chain. So, okay, what happens to the sugar after I eat it? Okay, it's broken down into glucose. That makes sense because we're talking about the blood glucose level. Whereabouts in the pancreas is insulin. So you're learning one new thing each time, as opposed to trying to learn absolutely everything. And that can go for any kind of process in any of your subjects. Do not try and learn absolutely everything in one go. So, even though the second example was more complicated, did you find it easier to follow than me just speaking? Because what you're also getting is a visual and auditory. Okay, so definitely for your science subjects, flowcharts are key. So who's gone before they've had their exam and found all the practice exams and practice questions and studied them meticulously and then got to the exam and not known how to answer the question? This happens mostly in senior and university levels where they give them the previous year's exams. Why is this a problem? Anyone know why this would be a problem when it really should be a helping hand? It's because Kelly's heard me ranting about that in a chemistry class. Is the students learn the questions. They don't learn how to answer the question. They don't learn the concept. They just learn how to answer that specific question. And guess what? If they give you the practice exam, do you think any question in the exam is going to be anything like those questions? Students will just get very good at answering those individual questions. It's very frustrating because people will study really hard. But just because you study hard, does that mean you're going to get any benefit from it? What's my favorite saying? Work smarter, not harder. Again, previous exams. If they put it in the previous year's exams, the questions the following year will be nothing like them. Even if the curriculum is the same. Study concepts, not questions. And I'm not going to do examples because I think we'll run out of time. But the idea is, if you're the practice exam might say, if I plant a plant outside in the sun, will it grow better in the inside or outside? So how would you study for a question like that? What would you look at? Would you just answer it yes? It will grow better outside. So to answer the question, you would study the concepts of plants, plant cells, and what a plant needs to grow, and what makes them grow best versus what makes them grow worse. And instead of just answering the question, use the information that you've learned to come to a conclusion. So if you just wrote yes to the practice, you go, people do this all the time. They go, yeah, obviously. And then the question in the next year's exam will be slightly different to that, but still using the same concept. You still need to know the same information. But this is why they test you in an exam, is because they want to test your understanding. And in order to understand, to apply something, you have to understand the concept as a whole. What I'm finding with my year 12 chemistry students is most of them have forgotten everything they did in unit 1 and 2 in grade 11. So instead of concentrating on studying for what's going to be in the exam, they're all wanting to just study the exam questions. And I keep saying, well, you can't answer the exam questions because you haven't studied. You don't have the basic level of understanding to be able to answer the question. There's a big difference between knowing lots of stuff and being able to apply that knowledge. So who has some good examples of YouTube channels for exam study for different subjects in different areas? Let's create a little repository in the chat. Yeah, Eddie Wu is brilliant. I spoke with Eddie earlier this year. He is absolutely good. Crash Course, Khan Academy is really good. Who else? There's a guy called Tyler something for chemistry. And I think the next slide will say something like, okay, no, switch myself up that. So YouTube videos are really good. So what about if you teach someone something? Do you think you've retained that information? If you explain something to someone thoroughly enough to teach them about something, do you think it's going to stick up here? Do you think that you have to understand something to be able to teach it? So if you train your brain to teach something to someone, your parents will really appreciate if you just start teaching them all the stuff you need to know. Just make them appreciate that. So they will hate you, but no, they won't hate you. If you can teach someone something, then you've got a pretty good understanding of it. And in order to teach something, you have to understand it. And you'll find that when you're teaching it, you actually put it together in the right order in your brain. I know way more than I did when I started full-time tutoring again a year ago. Not even a year ago. Just not even 6 months ago. All the stuff I thought I'd forgotten came back really quickly once I started teaching. So if you can teach it to someone, it also sticks in your mind better. So study groups are handy. What's some benefits of a study group? I was just about to say motivation, commitment, different ideas. Some people like the way I teach because I often explain something in 3 or 4 different ways. And eventually one of those ways sticks into the student's brain. So yeah, Ali says learn off each other, teach each other, bounce ideas, mind maps. If you can learn something multiple different ways, then you're more likely to retain it. Okay, my big thing, less is more. Now, that's not saying be lazy. That is saying that use the time that you do have to study in an efficient way. So it doesn't say do 2 hours of terrible study instead of 6. Instead of 6 hours a week, do 2 hours a week of quality study. Write quality notes, make sure you're prepared, Use all of the tricks and tips we've learned in these 3 weeks. And you'd be surprised at how little study you actually have to do. So less is more. Quality over quantity. So, humor me. Just humor me next time you study. So do bursts of 15 minutes. So 15-minute bursts, and then take a 5-minute break. So for every hour, you're studying for 45 minutes. Has anyone ever tried something like that? Some people do 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off, 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off. So just humor me and try it next time you study. Yeah, the risk here is in that 5-minute break, you go and watch a YouTube video for an hour and a half. You go down the rabbit hole. Everyone's different, but the key here is to try new things and see what works. If you try something new and it doesn't work, don't try it again. The worst thing that's going to happen is that you get a benefit from it, or you don't. You've wasted an hour. So Izzy, I would have to agree with you there. Only because that's what I used to do. I can't tell you off for studying like that because that's how I used to do it. Okay. Who's a crammer? I think everyone here's a crammer, including me. So what you find, students that do really, really well in grade 11 don't always do really, really well in grade 12. Kids that do really well, they cruise along up until grade 10. They struggle in grade 11 as well. A students can become B and C students. Students achieving an A in grade 11 will very quickly become a C student in grade 12. And it's not because the content is more difficult, but it's because all of a sudden you forget everything you did in grade 11. So not only are you trying to catch up with your study that you've forgotten about because you just crammed and didn't care if you retained it, passed your exam. Again, it comes to anxiety. You're anxious about an exam. You don't care what's going to happen in 12 months. You care about getting through that exam, and then you cram for 4 days straight. You don't sleep, you don't eat, drink water. You survive on coffee and nothing else. Again, I only know that from experience. So it's worth studying effectively for long-term knowledge retention. So, anyone know what spacing is? It's the opposite of cram. So spacing, instead of doing 20 hours of cramming before the exam, we do 2 hours of study for the every week for 10 weeks of the term. And all of the evidence suggests that it is significantly more efficient than cram. Whose anxiety tells them they have to read absolutely everything before the exam, or they won't. It won't be able to remember it. Who reads something an hour before their exam, get into an exam, sees the question, and mind blank. So I don't even need to ask, should you be changing your ways a little bit? So consistent study over a long period of time and constantly creating links each week will means you get to the exam fresh. You're not as, everyone's stressed from exams, but you're not as stressed as if you just spent 20 hours cramming. So the science says that spacing is best. Anxiety is typically what drives cramming. I don't know absolutely everything in this textbook, and the only way that I know I'm going to know it is if I read it from front to back Well, you will remember about 0 of that. Just reading something does not give you an understanding of it. So, plan for term 4. Excuse me. So, plan your studying from week 1. Look at the topics from weeks 1 to 10. Plan out how you're going to study that. Plan out what you need to know from the term before or the year before and incorporate that into your revision. So, review all of the information weekly. So, when you're talking about the sciences like biology, chemistry, typically the previous week relates to the previous week relates to the previous week. So there's always a tie-in or a link to create in your brain. So then you can still do a big week of study, but you're effectively not starting from scratch. So this way you're learning information as you go along. You may still need to then do 20 hours of study in the week before the exam, but you're not starting from 0. You're already maybe at 30 or 40% of the knowledge required. Then all you have to do is top up that knowledge with a big study session the week before the exam. You're not looking at a practice exam in week 10 and going, I have no idea what any of this means. So I always say you have to be able to relate something to the overall picture. So things don't very often happen independently. So something happens as a cause of something else, as a cause of something else, and eventually you get to the root cause. Look at diabetes. You can't understand diabetes until you understand how that process works. You can't understand how that process works until you understand what the organs do. You can't understand how the process works until you understand hormones and proteins. And if you try to just understand one part of that process as an individual part, you're not going to retain the information. So that's why I say draw the entire process out in the flowchart and then add more complex bits as your understanding grows. I think that's the best piece of advice I could give you for trying to learn new things. Again, looking at the sciences, this is why we do experiments and practical stuff. Because you learn the theory and the maths and the science behind everything, and then when you do an experiment, you get to see it. You get to hear it, you get to smell it, which only further reinforces the learning. So put it into practice. If you're learning about business, then start a business, even a mock business. And you will understand where everything fits. Who thinks if they do 760,000 things at the same time, then they'll get more done? I am really bad at this. I will have 5 or 6 things on the go. And how many of them do you think I actually get done out of those 5 or 6? Maybe 1. My wife is very much one thing at a time, whereas I'm a bit of a scatterbrain. I want to do everything at the same time. If I don't get this done, then I can't get this done. And then the thing that I started 4 hours ago is still open. And the thing that I've just started 30 seconds ago is also still open. And I've completed none of those tasks. So do not multitask. One thing at a time. And learn things in a different way. Read from your textbook, draw a flowchart, watch a YouTube video, explain the concept to someone. Eventually, one of those ways is going to make its way into your brain. People read a lecture slide, they write it down, and they go, sweet, I just wrote that down so I understand. that's just not the case. So explain it to someone, watch a YouTube video, draw a flowchart, and read your textbook. Those 4 things, you're going to end up taking in more than if you only use one. So what you guys are going to do, because I'm away next week, you're going to come up with a plan for the end of term 4 exams, if you have them. If not, we can still pretend. So, and then we'll go through the plans together, and hopefully by the end of term 4, everything will improve, including memory retention, grades, stress levels, all of that stuff, and it's not such a painful